Arthur Dayne stood upon the ramparts of the Red Keep and watched the horizon darken with Lannister banners. The rippling gold of the lions was visible even from that distance, snapping in the late afternoon wind beneath a sky that had taken on the color of dull iron. His breath caught in his throat. The siege had lingered too long for any sense of relief. What arrived now at the city's gates felt far too much like a predator's approach. Though he had always been the soul of composure, Sir Arthur Dayne could not entirely bury the knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. He had not dared to let himself imagine this moment, for even a Kingsguard knight who had faced war and bloodshed many times before could not entirely harden his heart against the potential doom awaiting them all in the capital. He remembered another battlefield, the Trident's rushing waters and the wide eyes of Prince Rhaegar when that fateful hammer blow came crashing down. So many of the realm's hopes had died there with Rhaegar Targaryen, and now only ghosts of the rightful Targaryen legacy remained in King's Landing, huddled behind tall walls. Elia Martell, heartbreak etched into her pale face, waited with her children, Rhaenys and little Aegon, knowing their father was dead, knowing that the war might be lost. Yet a mother would still cling to any thread of hope that someone, anyone, would keep her children safe. Arthur Dayne had been too late to save his friend, his prince at the Trident. Now he sensed that fate was presenting him with a second chance, a chance to redeem all that had gone so tragically wrong. If the Lannisters intended to storm King's Landing, if their intention was to offer feigned loyalty only to unleash chaos upon the city, he would be ready. He could not fail again, not where innocent children were concerned. He whispered a silent prayer to the Seven, though he was not the praying sort, then turned and made his way along the rampart walk with measured steps, heading toward the Tower of the Hand where small council meetings used to take place. Today, that place was deserted, the seats empty, the power of King Aerys scattered or cowering. But Arthur had no time to dwell on the emptiness of the Red Keep. There were bigger matters at stake, and no one else was going to stand for these Targaryen children if he did not. The loyal gold cloaks had grown thin in number, discipline fraying under the stress of siege and rumors. Varys scurried like a ghost through the passageways, whispering secrets no one asked for. Pycelle was either in his chambers or pandering to Lord Tywin's might, if the Grand Maester thought it wise to shift alliances. The time had come for the one they called the Sword of the Morning to act as the realm's protector in truth. He only wished he knew how deeply the seeds of treachery had rooted in the city. His white cloak fluttered as he reached the end of the rampart. Below him, in the castle yard, men hurried to and fro, carrying swords, barrels of pitch, and crossbow bolts in a frantic dance that offered little solace. Fear pulsed in every breath, in every clang of steel, in every harried order called out to the nervous defenders on the walls. From behind him came a mild footstep, quiet, yet purposeful. Arthur turned to see Ser Jaime Lannister approaching with slow, hesitant strides. The young knight's face was etched with uncertainty. The gold of his house was everywhere, from the pommel of his sword to the lion crest on his tunic. Arthur studied Jaime for a moment, recalling how the lad had once admired him, had yearned to be the finest knight in the land. But lines of tension marked Jaime's brow now, a mixture of guilt and frustration. The war had changed them all. "They have arrived," Jaime said, glancing toward the sea of Lannister crimson and gold that had formed beyond the city walls. "My father, he won't let this drag on. He'll do whatever it takes." Arthur nodded. "I know he will," he replied. Despite the courtesy in his tone, there was an edge to his words. "And I know what your father is capable of when he thinks the tides have turned." Jaime's green eyes, still boyish beneath the shining gold hair, flickered with something that might have been sorrow. "We can't just let them in uncontested, can we?" he asked. "Yet the king," Arthur's jaw tensed. The king. Aerys was lost to reason, clinging to his seat of power with increasing paranoia, giving orders to burn them all at the slightest hint of betrayal. Word had reached Arthur's ears that the king's pyromancers had seeded wildfire caches throughout the city. If Tywin Lannister stormed inside, if Aerys gave the word, King's Landing might be reduced to a green inferno. Countless innocents would die, and the guilt would haunt the realm for decades. Aerys might despise Tywin, might want to make him pay for real or imagined slights, but the entire capital would become collateral in that madness. "We need a plan," Arthur said quietly. "Your father comes with tens of thousands of men. We have the gold cloaks and the walls. If we can hold them off, we risk Aerys' wrath. If we let them in, we risk butchery on par with Harrenhal." Jaime nodded, but he looked lost. "Is there no chance the king will heed reason? That if we surrender, Robert will show mercy?" "Surrender would require the king to see reason," Arthur said sharply. "And we both know that is as likely as the others hosting a harvest feast beyond the wall." Jaime's shoulders stiffened. He looked away. The youth had grown older than his years, placed in impossible circumstances. Arthur thought fleetingly that if Jaime had not been so bound by vow and family, he might have turned out to be a great knight in truth. "Go to him," Arthur instructed quietly. "Try to keep him calm. I must see to the defense, and perhaps see if we can broker something other than a massacre." Jaime offered a short nod and pivoted away, leaving Arthur alone again on the ramparts. The wind ruffled Arthur's silver-gray armor, and he felt the intangible weight of the dawn-colored sword at his side. Dawn was a blade of legend, forged from the heart of a fallen star, and its presence always reminded him of the Dayne legacy. To be a shining light of chivalry in a realm too often beset by darkness. Now, that darkness threatened to devour the city unless he used every ounce of his skill and cunning to prevent it. He made his way down the steps, weaving through the corridors of the Red Keep until he reached the courtyard. Along the way he summoned what remained of the Kingsguard. Ser Jonathan Darry was wounded in a makeshift infirmary, with a half-healed slash on his sword arm, and so could not be of full help if the city were to be attacked. Ser Barristan Selmy was not in the city. Last Arthur had heard, Barristan had been gravely injured at the Trident and was taken by the rebels to be tended for his wounds. That left Jaime Lannister, too conflicted to act freely, and Lewin Martell, another casualty, though in a different place. He had perished on the Trident as well, an uncle to Elia Martell and a proud Dornishman. So, in truth, what remained of the Kingsguard in King's Landing was a single man who still had both skill and will to fight: Arthur Dayne himself. Yet, for the sake of the children, he would become as many men as necessary. He pushed open a tall door leading to a stone hall, and his boots echoed on the polished floor. Court functionaries lurked about like ghosts, uncertain if they should flee or remain. Arthur paid them no mind. He was bound for the princess's chambers, determined to see that Elia and her children were prepared for whatever was coming. The gravity of the city's situation pressed down upon him, as if the very air had grown thick with dread. When he reached the apartments set aside for Princess Elia, guards bearing the Martell sun and spear upon their surcoats allowed him entry with nods of tense respect. The chambers smelled of spiced wine and dried tears. Elia Martell stood by a narrow window, her arms folded protectively across her chest. She was pale, thinner than he remembered, her dark hair framing cheekbones that had grown sharper from worry and grief. By her skirts stood Rhaenys, big brown eyes large with uncertainty. Prince Aegon was asleep in a cradle in the adjoining room, or so Arthur had been told. "Ser Arthur," Elia greeted, forcing her voice to remain calm. She had always been graceful, but now that grace was overshadowed by heartbreak. Her eyes darted toward the door as if expecting the worst. "Is it true? The Lannisters have arrived." "They have," he confirmed softly. "We do not yet know if they intend to offer true fealty to the king or if they plan something more treacherous. I won't mince words, Princess. Lord Tywin is no friend to your children's cause. His ambitions have always run deep." Elia glanced down at Rhaenys, who clung to her mother's skirts. "I should have listened to Oberyn," she murmured. "He always believed Tywin Lannister would not stay neutral forever, but we were too caught in the illusions of alliance. Or perhaps I was just desperate to believe in any help." Rhaenys pressed against her mother's leg, as if shy even of the Kingsguard who had protected her family for years. The girl had grown these past months. Gone was some of the childish roundness of her face. Sorrow had aged her prematurely. Arthur knelt so that he was at eye level with her. "Princess Rhaenys," he said gently, You have my word that I shall do everything I can to keep you and your brother safe. The Kingsguard vow is not an empty oath, and I keep my oaths." The girl offered a timid nod. Arthur felt his heart twist. He had seen far too many children become casualties of power struggles. He would not allow Rhaenys and Aegon to be among them, if it was in his power to prevent. Standing, he spoke quietly to Elia, his voice steady, every word carefully chosen. "If the worst occurs, you must be ready to flee. Have your servants pack lightly. I will see if we can secure a passage out of the city, perhaps by a postern gate or by ship. But promise me that if I come for you, you will do as I say, no matter what." Elia held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, of course. You have my trust in this, Sir Arthur." He exhaled slowly, relieved to hear it. "I am going now to speak with the captain of the Gold Cloaks. We will set a perimeter near Maegor's Holdfast. My main concern is that the gates do not open to Tywin's forces unless we are certain of their intentions. But I fear what the king might order if he believes the city is about to fall." Elia's expression darkened. "The wildfire," she whispered, voice trembling. "You've heard the rumors, too. I do not care what the king says or threatens. If he tries to put my children to the torch along with the rest of the city, I will not sit idly by." She swallowed hard, tears threatening to fall, but she forced them back. "If you must do something rash to protect Rhaenys and Aegon, do it. I would rather the realm remember me as a traitor than watch my children burned alive." Arthur gently placed a hand over hers. "I understand," he said, and truly he did. "Pray it does not come to that." He left her then, stepping back into the corridors with a bow. He walked quickly, every step purposeful, heading for the throne room. If ever there was a day to speak plainly to a mad king, this was it, though the notion of reason having any effect on Aerys had long since frayed. Even so, Arthur Dayne had not risen to be among the most respected knights in Westeros by quailing before impossible tasks. If there was a shard of sanity left in the king, he would try to reach it. The hall leading to the throne room was dimly lit, torches guttering in sconces, the floor tapestries stained with old footsteps. A pair of gold cloaks stood guard at the large doors, but they barely mustered the energy for a salute. Arthur pushed them open and stepped inside, ignoring the stale, smoky air that clung to everything. Aerys II Targaryen, king of the Seven Kingdoms, perched upon the Iron Throne like a half-starved vulture. His hair was unkempt, the once silver mane now a dull, tangled mess, and his nails had grown into ragged talons. By his side stood a robed pyromancer, silent and watchful. Jaime Lannister was off to one side, stiff as a statue, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "Your Grace," Arthur said, pausing at the foot of the throne. He forced himself to keep his tone respectful. "Lord Tywin Lannister's host is outside the city. Will you greet him as friend or foe?" The king's eyes gleamed with feverish light. "Friend," he spat. "Until he proves himself foe, let him enter as he pleads. My gates are open to him, yes, yes." He let out a soft, high-pitched laugh. "But if he dares to cross me, if any dares to cross me, I will give the order to burn them. Burn them all." Arthur's heart skipped a beat. He forced himself to remain outwardly calm. "Your Grace," he said evenly, "is it wise to open the gates without conditions? We do not want a traitorous force rampaging through the city. Many innocents could be harmed. Perhaps it would be better to arrange terms, even under a flag of truce." "You question me?" Aerys snapped, his voice cutting through the chamber. He rose halfway from the throne, though his movements were jerky and uncertain. "You question your rightful king? I see betrayal in your eyes. I see Rhaegar's sympathy, yes, that old softness. But Rhaegar is dead, boy, and I am the king." Arthur's teeth clenched, but he forced them to loosen before he spoke. "I do not question your Grace's right to rule. I wish only to protect you and the city. I suggest we hold the gates, at least until we have Lord Tywin's word on paper. He may claim loyalty, but we should be certain." Aerys hissed like a cornered animal. "Certain? Certain? The only certainty I need is that I am king. I will allow the Lannisters within the walls, and if they mean to betray me, I have my remedy." He gestured wildly to the pyromancer, who gave Arthur a tense, wary glance. "Wildfire in every corner, every cellar, beneath every tower. One false step, and the city goes up in green flames. Every traitor burns, every turncloak, every spider, every eunuch, every man, woman, child, all ashes. Would you question me again, Sir Arthur Dayne?" Arthur looked at Jaime, who had gone white as a sheet. The younger knight's lips parted, but no words emerged. The tension in the room was suffocating. The king's mania was past all reason. If Arthur pressed him further, it could prompt Heirs to order his immediate execution. Yet if Arthur did nothing, Tywin's men would be inside the walls, and a slaughter would follow. The city watch might stand aside or might be overwhelmed. The king's madness might lead to that final, irreversible command, to burn them all. Calmly, Arthur bowed his head. "You are the king," he said, controlling the tremor that threatened to creep into his voice. "I ask your grace's leave to prepare the defenses. We will greet Lord Tywin's forces as you command." Aerys stared at him, eyes flicking across Arthur's face, suspicious, searching. Then he sat back, letting out a wheezing laugh. "Go," he said. "Yes, go. We shall see which side Lord Tywin has chosen. If he has come to kneel, well and good. And if not—" His lips stretched in a grin that showed cracked, bloodless skin. "Let them burn." Arthur inclined his head once more, then turned and walked quickly out of the throne room, heart pounding. Jaime followed behind, and once they were out of earshot, the young lion expelled a shuddering breath. "It's going to happen," he murmured. "I know my father. He won't let the city slip from his fingers. If the Mad King tries to burn the city, do you think he'd hesitate?" Arthur said nothing at first. The weight of destiny seemed to press upon his shoulders. "It need not come to that," he finally said, though he wondered if he truly believed it. "Your father will march in. We must be prepared to protect Princess Elia and the children. That is my first duty. I will not stand by while innocents are slaughtered." Jaime stopped in the corridor, grabbing Arthur's arm. "And if that means disobeying the king?" His voice trembled, but only just. "What does our vow say then?" The question lingered in the stale air. Arthur recalled the vow they had all taken: to guard the king with all their might, to obey his commands, to keep his secrets, to defend his name and honor. But never had he imagined such a king could sink into madness so total that fulfilling that vow would mean condoning atrocities. Arthur Dayne had never truly lost faith in the ideals of knighthood until the last few months. There had been cracks, of course, whispers of cruelty, the burning of traitors, the savage whims of a tyrant. But to see it up close, to stand as witness to a king who would gladly raise his own capital, it shattered something fundamental within him. "Sometimes," Arthur said slowly, "the vow must be interpreted to serve the realm. The king is meant to protect his people, not destroy them. If the king fails that duty, we do not become complicit in the crime." He thought of Riella, of Rhaegar, of all the Targaryens once beloved by the people. This madness was not what House Targaryen was meant to represent, not what the dragons of old had once stood for. Perhaps the realm had outgrown them, or perhaps the flame had simply burnt too long and too bright, until only cinders of reason remained. "We do what we must," he concluded. Jaime released his grip, nodding as though half relieved to hear Arthur's words, half terrified of what they implied. Together, they continued toward the courtyard, where the city's watchmen had begun mustering under the direction of an anxious-looking Janos Slint and a few more seasoned captains. The bells began to toll the hour, a sound that carried across King's Landing like the solemn knell of doom. Within half an hour, word came that the king had ordered the gates opened for the Lannisters. Hundreds of men, bearing the Golden Lion, poured into the outer city with surprising discipline. But fear was thick as peasants cowered in their hovels, uncertain if Tywin's men would keep the peace or begin a rampage. Arthur posted himself along the main thoroughfare, near the city watch, sword belted at his side, cloak of white a beacon. He was determined that if something sparked violence, He would not allow it to spread unopposed. And then, as evening shadows stretched across the crooked streets, the first screams echoed. Started in Flea Bottom, but it traveled fast. Soldiers in lion-crested armor forced their way into shops and hovels, searching for those rumored to have Targaryen sympathies, or simply looking for loot. Soon, that search became savage. A door was kicked in. A girl screamed. A man shouted that he had no coin to offer. A soldier's sword was drawn. Fear turned to frenzy. Frenzy turned to bloodshed. Arthur gritted his teeth and ordered the watchmen to hold their lines. But the watch had no love for the king or the Targaryens, and many had been secretly bribed by Lannisters over the past weeks. Their discipline crumbled. Some turned a blind eye, some joined in looting. Only a small fraction remained loyal or at least committed to preventing chaos. As the panic spread, men and women poured into the streets, fleeing from pockets of violence. Flames erupted in a tannery. Smoke curled into the air, black and acrid. Janos Slint, sweaty-faced and wide-eyed, tried to bark orders, but half the watch no longer followed him. Arthur realized with a pang of disgust that the city was lost in that moment. Unless someone took swift, decisive action, King's Landing would be sacked from within, even before Tywin's main force arrived in the inner wards. He swore quietly and looked toward the Red Keep in the distance. He had to get back. He had to protect the children. Let the city watch fail in the streets if it must, but he would not let Rhaenys and Aegon fall into the hands of men like Gregor Clegane or Amory Lorch. He turned to the watchmen who still stood near him, 24, perhaps, men who had not yet abandoned their posts. "You with me," he commanded, a note of authority in his voice that allowed no dissent. "We make for the Red Keep. We do not harm any we see fleeing. But if Lannister soldiers cross our path and do violence, we show them no mercy. Is that understood?" Those men, uncertain but afraid to disobey the legendary sword of the morning, gave nods and murmured agreement. Arthur set off at a brisk pace. The city was turning into a labyrinth of chaos and fear. Civilians rushed in all directions, mothers crying out for lost children, men rummaging for weapons. They saw the white cloak and parted before him like water. Even so, it took them far too long to reach the gate of the Red Keep. By then, more Lannister soldiers had appeared, streaming across the moat, letting the drawbridge down with the help of turncloak guards. The outer wards of the Red Keep were compromised. Arthur's jaw set in grim determination, and he motioned for his small band to stand firm at the entrance to a narrow courtyard that led deeper into the keep. "Hold this line," he told them, voice carrying over the din of madness. "We defend the royal family's apartments. Any soldier who tries to pass without my leave is to be turned aside. If he resists, kill him." Those men, hearts pounding, formed a ragged rank. Arthur left them there and raced up the steps leading to Maegor's Holdfast. His boots hammered against the stones, each step echoing the frantic beat of his heart. The Holdfast was a fortress within a fortress, ringed by its own walls and moat. Inside were the royal apartments and Elia Martell and her children. If the Lannisters aimed to seize the Targaryen heirs, it would be there that they struck. He slipped through a postern door and found a scene of quiet terror. Servants rushed about, arms full of what few possessions they could carry. Princess Elia stood in the hallway, Rhaenys clinging to her skirts, Prince Aegon in her arms. Both children looked frightened. Arthur rushed to her side, scanning the corridor. "We have no time," he said, voice hushed but urgent. "We must move now. The city is sacking itself. Lannister men are within the Red Keep. We have to get you away from here." Elia's eyes widened. "But where can we go? The gates? The docks?" Arthur grimaced. "Both will be swarming with soldiers soon. Our best chance might be through the secret tunnels, those that lead to the river. Varys told me there's a way out beneath the dungeons, an old passage that leads outside the city walls. If we can get that far, we might find a boat." Elia gave a shaky nod. She clutched Aegon, who whimpered softly, and motioned for Rhaenys to stay close. Arthur placed a comforting hand on the princess's shoulder, then led them down the corridor. Every step felt fraught with peril. At any moment, Lannister men could appear and hamper their escape. Screams from outside the holdfast walls hinted at the brutality unfolding in the courtyards. Turning a corner, they nearly collided with Jaime Lannister. His sword was unsheathed, stained with blood. His eyes flicked from Arthur to Elia to the children, and he exhaled with relief when he saw no immediate threat. "The king has gone mad," Jaime said, voice cracking. "He just ordered his pyromancer to light the wildfire. He means to incinerate the entire city rather than let Robert take it." Arthur felt a cold wave wash over him. "Where is he now?" he demanded. "In the throne room," Jaime said, chest heaving. "I was outside the doors when I heard him shouting. I can't let this happen. Innocent people are going to die." Arthur stared at the young knight, trying to decide quickly. "If we flee, we might save the princess and her children. But if the wildfire is lit, the city burns anyway. Tens of thousands will die, maybe more." He glanced at Elia, whose face had gone ashen at the news. "Princess, you must go. Jaime and I will do what we can to stop the king's pyromancers. Find Varys if you can. He knows the secret tunnels. Just get out." She nodded, tears welling, but she did not delay further with words. She leaned in, pressing a trembling kiss to Arthur's cheek. "Save my children, Sir Arthur," she whispered. "I will do as you say." He offered the barest of nods. "Go quickly. I will find you if I can." Elia clutched the children and hurried down the corridor, a small handful of Martell guards and servants following. With any luck, they would discover Varys scuttling through the hidden passages, or he would find them. Once beyond the city, they could try for Dorne or Dragonstone, or anywhere that might offer sanctuary. Arthur prayed it would be enough. Now he turned back to Jaime. "You say the king is in the throne room with his pyromancer. Then that is where we must go. If we can stop them from sending a signal to the wildfire caches, we can still save the city." Jaime nodded. "My father's men are killing everyone in sight. I passed 2 pyromancers' bodies on my way here. They were trying to do something in the lower levels." He swallowed. "We have to hurry." Together, they sprinted through the twisting corridors, leaping over debris, pushing aside terrified courtiers. The castle seemed to shudder with the pounding of men's boots, the ring of steel, the desperate cries of the wounded. Ahead, the tall doors of the throne room came into view. 2 Lannister soldiers lay dead on the threshold, throats slashed by Jaime's sword or perhaps by one of the king's guard. But the doors were forced open, revealing flickering torchlight beyond. Inside, the Iron Throne loomed, and in front of it stood King Aerys, perched on the dais' steps. Blood pooled around him. The body of his last loyal pyromancer sprawled near his feet, throat cut. The king himself was shrieking at the top of his lungs, flecks of spittle on his lips. "Traitors! Treason! I am your king! How dare you defy me?" Across from Aerys, Gregor Clegane towered in blood-stained armor, a massive sword in his gauntlet fists. A small knot of Lannister men stood behind the mountain, apparently uncertain what to do, as though they had stumbled upon the king's meltdown and were momentarily transfixed. One pyromancer yet lived, cowering off to the side, a torch in hand. Arthur's eyes narrowed when he recognized the glass vial and tinderbox at the man's belt, tools used to light wildfire triggers. If he set them off, the city was done. Before either Arthur or Jaime could speak, Aerys let out a final, hysterical cackle. "Burn them!" he screamed. "Burn them all! The flames will consume." Gregor Clegane moved. With terrifying speed for a man of his size, he lunged forward, that monstrous sword sweeping out in a lethal arc. The king tried to scramble back, but it was too late. The blade bit through cloth and flesh, nearly cleaving Aerys in 2. Blood spattered the throne, the dais, and the floor in a grotesque spray. The mad king's eyes went wide with shock, and he toppled forward, face down, a strangled gurgle emerging from his ruined throat. Arthur caught his breath at the sight, but he did not freeze. With the king dead, Gregor turned his hungry gaze upon the cowering pyromancer. If Gregor cut that man down, the city might be saved. unless the pyromancer managed a dying spark. Arthur had to act. He leapt across the floor, lightning quick. Gregor raised his sword, but Arthur swatted it aside with Dawn, the reverberation sending shockwaves up both their arms. The pyromancer dropped to the ground with a squeal, shielding his head. One of the Lannister soldiers lunged to grab him, presumably to keep him from igniting anything, but the man was too slow. Arthur's clash with Gregor Clegane drew everyone's attention. The mountain's sword hammered against Dawn. Arthur sidestepped, pivoting on one foot, letting Gregor's slash slice through empty air. He whipped Dawn around in a silver blur, scoring a deep cut across Gregor's plated shoulder. The giant roared, blood splashing the polished floor. Jaime sprang forward as well, intercepting a Lannister soldier who attempted to join the fray on Gregor's behalf. Jaime disarmed the man with a deft parry, then knocked him senseless with the pommel. Another soldier, seeing that the king was dead, turned and ran out the door. The rest watched, uncertain. Arthur pressed his advantage. Gregor was big, yes, but slower. Dawn was a blade unlike any other, and Arthur was the most skilled knight in the realm. Even so, Gregor's strength was immense. Every block sent a jarring impact through Arthur's arms. The mountain roared again, spittle flying from his lips, slashing downward with a blow meant to cleave Arthur from collarbone to hip. Arthur sidestepped again, drew the sword across Gregor's thigh, and earned another bellow of pain. The giant staggered, blood pouring from 2 wounds now. Enraged, he charged forward, hoping to overpower Arthur with sheer bulk. Arthur, nimble as a dancer, whirled away and turned Gregor's momentum against him, sliding Dawn through a gap in the massive man's armor just under the breastplate. The blade cut deep. Gregor's eyes widened, the rage in them flickering. With a final, hoarse snarl, he collapsed in a thunderous crash, sword clattering from his grip. Silence reigned in the throne room, broken only by ragged breathing. The Mad King lay dead in a pool of his own blood, and Gregor Clegane's huge body sprawled not far from him. The pyromancer cowered, but did not move to light his fire. Jaime still held his sword at the ready, glancing around for any further threat. 2 Lannister soldiers remained in the chamber. One had been disarmed by Jaime. The other stood frozen, sword half-raised, uncertain whether to continue the fight or to surrender. Arthur, chest heaving, lifted Dawn to point at the soldier's throat. "Surrender," he said coldly. "Now." The man let his sword fall with a clatter, hands raised in terror. The other soldier was already unarmed. Outside, the sounds of fighting still raged, but within the throne room, the critical moment had passed. King Aerys' death was both a tragedy and a potential salvation. He would give no more orders to burn the city. But that did not mean the slaughter was over. Arthur glanced at Jaime, who stood trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the dead king. "He was going to do it," Jaime said in a hollow tone. "He was going to burn everyone. I couldn't stand and let—" Arthur stepped forward and placed a hand on Jaime's shoulder. "I know," he murmured. "If Gregor had not cut him down, we might have had to do it ourselves. We can't allow the city to burn." Jaime nodded absently, still staring at Aerys. Arthur recognized the conflict within the young knight. He had sworn to protect the king, yet the king had become the realm's biggest threat. Tonight, a vow had died, replaced by a harsh truth. Knighthood sometimes required choices that shattered illusions. The only question was whether the realm would condemn them for it. Arthur grabbed the pyromancer by his robe collar and hauled him upright. "Where are the wildfire caches?" he demanded, voice terse. "Is there a signal that must be given? Tell me how to stop it." The man's teeth chattered, and he reeked of sweat and fear. Scattered as the caches, scattered beneath the city, sewers and sea cellars. King's orders to light them if... Arthur shook him. "Who has the order now? Who else can set them off?" There are other pyromancers, but they're scattered. We needed the king's final word, or a sign. We need the bells rung 3 times, or someone to carry the order. It can still happen, if they get the word. The man looked near hysterical. "Don't kill me. I won't set them off. I swear." Arthur could only imagine how many men had been assigned to this dreadful task. If any one of them lit so much as a single cache, entire districts could burn. "Jaime," Arthur said, tossing a glance at the king's guard with the lion-engraved sword, "find every pyromancer you can. Stop them, kill them if you must, but do not let them light those fires. Post men at the bell towers so they cannot ring a triple peal. I'll do what I can to secure the keep and protect the royal family." Jaime sheathed his sword, squared his shoulders, and inclined his head. "I will. What about the Lannister men outside? They won't stop. They think the city is ripe for the taking." Arthur exhaled, stepping toward the dais where the king's body lay cooling. "I'll try to rally any loyalists left, keep them from storming Maegor's holdfast. With the king dead, the rightful heir—" He halted. The rightful heir had been Rhaegar, and Rhaegar was gone, slain at the Trident. That left Rhaegar's children, little Aegon and Rhaenys. If they survived, they were the Targaryen heirs now. But Robert Baratheon would contest that, no doubt. In that moment, Arthur felt the weight of the entire realm's future settling upon him. "I will protect the children," he finished quietly. "We'll see how many decent men remain to stand with us." Jaime nodded, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. Then he turned and rushed out, leaving Arthur alone with the corpses and the cowering pyromancer. Arthur signaled one of the surrendered Lannister soldiers. "You," he said, voice cold as ice, "bind the pyromancer's hands behind his back. If he so much as breathes near a fire, slit his throat." The soldier swallowed hard, but obeyed, rummaging for some cord in his belt. Arthur would have to trust the man's fear of dawn as sufficient motivation to keep the pyromancer in check. With that settled, Arthur knelt beside the king's body. Aerys Targaryen, the second of his name, once tall and graceful, had become this broken husk, undone by madness and betrayal. Arthur felt no sorrow for the man, not after all the atrocities. But he did feel a sense of finality, as though centuries of Targaryen rule had perished in this moment. Perhaps the line could continue through Rhaegar's children, perhaps not. The realm was broken, and the future uncertain. He rose, stepping over the pools of blood, and made his way out of the throne room, heading for the ramparts once more. Even through the thick walls, the clang of steel and the screams of terror reverberated. The city was still under siege, from within, from men who were sating their lust for blood and plunder. If Arthur could hold the Red Keep's inner ward, at least Elia and the children would have a fighting chance. Racing through corridors, he encountered bands of Lannister soldiers. Some recognized him and backed away nervously, for who would willingly charge the sword of the morning? Others, emboldened by numbers, tried to overwhelm him. In one hallway near the royal apartments, Arthur found himself facing half a dozen men at once. They slashed and stabbed, but he moved like quicksilver, weaving a deadly tapestry with dawn. One by one they fell, painting the corridor red. Arthur pressed on, refusing to let exhaustion slow him. He had to reach Elia to ensure she had escaped or was close to it. He finally arrived at the entrance to the princess's chambers, only to find the door broken. The anteroom was littered with the bodies of Martell guards. Blood spattered the walls, staining the once lush tapestries. Arthur's breath caught. If the Lannisters had arrived before he could secure their escape, he stepped cautiously inside. Further carnage led to a small receiving parlor. A Lannister soldier lay with his head half-severed, an ornate Dornish spear in his chest. Among the bodies was one of Elia's handmaids, her throat cut. Tears burned Arthur's eyes, but he forced them back. He ventured deeper, heart pounding. In the bedchamber beyond, the bed linens were torn, furniture overturned. But there was no sign of Elia or the children. Relief and fear mingled within him. They might have escaped or they might have been taken. A faint cry sounded from beyond the chamber. A muffled voice, near the secret passages, perhaps. Arthur rushed toward the panel at the far side, pushing aside the heavy dresser that someone had tried to barricade it with. The panel slid open, revealing a dark corridor lit only by a dropped lantern. Within, 2 Martell guards lay wounded, but breathing. One of them recognized Arthur and croaked, "They're gone, my lord. Taken by Varys, we think. We tried to stop those lions. We fought them. Succeeded. The princess has gone deeper into the tunnels." Arthur bent to check the man's wounds, but there was little he could do without a maester. "You did well," he said softly. "I will see the princess to safety. Keep watch here if you can. If more Lannisters come, hide yourselves until it's clear." The guard nodded weakly. Arthur took the lantern, careful not to set anything aflame, and slipped into the passage. The walls were close, the air foul. Sticky cobwebs brushed his face. He moved quickly, stepping over scattered bodies. Some were Lannister men, others the Martell guards. The path led downward, twisting into the bowels of the Red Keep. If Varys was guiding them, the spider might lead them to a sally port that emerged near the river gate or out onto the Blackwater. Arthur prayed the labyrinth would not become a tomb. Down and down he went, footsteps echoing. Felt like hours, though in truth it might have been only minutes. When he finally spotted a flicker of light ahead, he pressed his back to the wall and peered around a corner. A short, plump figure in voluminous robes stood with a hand on a torch, whispering urgently to Elia. Next to them, Rhaenys and Aegon huddled, eyes wide with fear. A few Martell guards remained, along with 2 men Arthur recognized as petty criminals favored by Varys for their knowledge of smuggling tunnels. They were preparing a small boat, half submerged in what looked like an underground canal. Water lapped at stone steps. Arthur stepped forward into their circle of light. Elia gasped, though her expression changed to relief when she recognized him. "Thank the gods you found us," she said softly. "Varys showed us the way." Varys gave a half bow, the torchlight flickering on his smooth scalp. "Ser Arthur," he greeted. "We meet again in these interesting circumstances. I gather things above are quite terrible." Arthur nodded grimly. "The king is dead. Gregor Clegane killed him. The city is lost to Lannister forces. But Jaime is trying to prevent the wildfire from being lit. If we are lucky, King's Landing will not burn. You need to get the princess and her children out of here safely. I will come with you, if only to ensure no harm befalls them." Varys nodded. "A prudent plan. This passage leads to the river gate area. I have a skiff waiting if we can reach the docks. We'll have to move quietly and pray that the main chaos is focused nearer the mud gate. The Lannisters will not be looking for a single small boat in the dark." Arthur helped Elia and the children step carefully into the small craft. The Martell guards who still lived and could walk climbed aboard as well, though their number was fewer than half a dozen. Varys handed the torch off to one of his accomplices and took the rudder. The water was dark and foul-smelling, but hopefully it offered them salvation. Arthur eased onto one of the wooden seats, sword balanced across his knees. Rhaenys clung to her mother, tears on her cheeks. Aegon, hardly more than a babe, let out a soft wail, as if sensing the danger all around. Elia kissed his forehead, whispering words of comfort. The boat pushed off, drifting down the underground canal, beneath low-hanging stone arches that threatened to scrape their heads if they did not duck. Arthur peered into the shadows, half expecting Lannister men to leap out at any moment, but the gloom remained still. Drips of water echoed in the silence. Far off, above them, they could hear the faint rumble of distant battle. Smoke or dust trickled through cracks in the stone. At one point, a tremor shook the passage, causing chunks of mortar to fall, and the children whimpered. Arthur feared it might be the beginning of a wildfire detonation, but the shaking ceased. After an agonizing journey, the passage opened into a wide waterway that connected with the Blackwater Rush. The night air greeted them, starless and heavy with smoke. King's Landing's skyline flickered in the distance, fires raging in several quarters. Arthur's jaw tensed as he considered the horrors befalling the city. Could Jaime truly stop the wildfire? Could anyone? But no matter what, the children came first. He guided Varys and the Martell guards toward a set of pilings where a larger boat waited, tethered and guarded by a single figure who wore a hood. The figure gave a sharp nod when Varys approached. They helped Elia, Rhaenys, and Aegon onto the bigger craft. Arthur joined them, scanning the shoreline for threats. Shouts and screams echoed from far up the river, and a blaze illuminated the night in the direction of Flea Bottom. There would be no going back now, not unless they wanted to plunge into the maelstrom of death. Perhaps it was better to flee, to survive, to keep the children alive so that a Targaryen legacy might endure. Varys's boatmen pushed off, and the small vessel drifted down the Blackwater, letting the current carry them away from the city's main docks. Elia stared at the castle on the hill, tears reflecting the flames behind her. She was silent, but Arthur could feel her anguish radiating like a physical thing. Rhaenys pressed close to her mother, fear etched into her every feature. Aegon dozed fitfully in Elia's arms, too young to understand the tragedy that had befallen his bloodline. Arthur felt his heart ache for them, but he also steeled himself for the trials ahead. They might have escaped the immediate slaughter, but Robert Baratheon's wrath would be formidable. If the Targaryen heirs survived, they would remain a threat to his claim. War might not end so easily. Time seemed to blur as they sailed further into the night. The glare of fires receded behind them, though the glow never fully vanished from the sky. Exhaustion weighed down Arthur's limbs, but he refused to yield to it. He remained vigilant, his gaze sweeping the waters. Occasionally, they passed half-burned fishing boats or debris from the city's piers. Refugees might have tried to flee in any craft they could find. The night was filled with distant cries, carrying over the water like the lamentations of tormented souls. "Where will we go now?" she asked, voice trembling. Varys cleared his throat softly. "We should find safe harbor. Dragonstone might be an option, though I hear storms battered it recently. Then again, the Queen Dowager is or was there, or Dorne, where your brother rules. But it would be a long journey, and Robert's men may try to block the way if they learn you've escaped." He looked at Arthur, the question unspoken. Was it truly wise for them to remain in Westeros at all? Arthur considered the possibilities. Dorne might be the safest stronghold in the realm for the children, given Prince Doran's loyalty to his sister and nephews. But we risk encountering rebel lords on the march, and I doubt Robert's forces would allow an open path to Sunspear. Dragonstone is nearer, but it might already be in disarray. And if Robert takes King's Landing in full, he'll quickly send ships to blockade it. A memory surfaced. He recalled rumors that the pregnant Queen Riella had been sent to Dragonstone for safety. Perhaps she was still there, heavy with child. If so, an alliance of Targaryen loyalists could gather under that banner. But all was uncertain now. Elia gazed at the children, lips trembling. "Dorne," she whispered. "I want my children in Dorne. My brother will protect them. Even if we must hide in the Shadow City for years, at least they will be among their kin." Arthur nodded. "Then we will try for Dorne. We'll need to be cunning, though. Perhaps the best route is along the coast, avoiding major ports. We can slip ashore in the southern Stormlands and travel by land, taking roads less patrolled. I will do my utmost to guide you there safely." He glanced at Varys. The spymaster's face was unreadable in the torchlight, but Arthur imagined the man's mind was whirling with potential schemes. "Can you help us secure false passage or secrecy from any who might betray our whereabouts?" Arthur asked. Varys folded his hands in his sleeves. "I can try. My little birds remain scattered across the kingdoms, though some might have already abandoned me, given the chaos. But I can certainly do more than most. Rest assured, Ser Arthur, I will not betray the princess or her children. I have my reasons for wanting them safe." Arthur considered pressing him for those reasons but decided it was a moot point. Right now, they needed every ally they could get. "Very well," he said. "We'll rely on your help." Elia pulled her cloak tighter around herself, glancing again at the receding city. Smoke trailed in the starless sky, and flickers of orange hinted that fires still raged. She took it with a grateful nod, too drained to speak. The few remaining Martell guards in the boat slumped, exhausted, but still alert enough to keep watch. The day wore on as they navigated the coastline, mindful of any sails that might bear the crowned stag of Baratheon or the golden lion of Lannister. Once, they spotted a large galley flying the red and gold Lannister banner far out at sea, but it did not approach. Arthur suspected it might be circling to blockade the city or to intercept any Targaryen loyalists. Fortunately, the small craft passed unnoticed, hugging the shoreline's coves. At length, as the sun climbed higher, Arthur allowed himself to consider the enormity of what had happened. Aerys Targaryen was dead, the capital sacked, the Targaryen cause scattered. But the heirs lived, at least these two, and somewhere Riella carried another child. Or had that child been born? Arthur was unsure. If Riella still lived, if the unborn child survived, the line continued. Yet would that suffice to rally support against Robert? Or would Robert's victory at the Trident and the capture of King's Landing seal his claim? A wave of anger washed over him. Anger at Aerys for pushing the realm to this brink, at Tywin Lannister for unleashing such cruelty, at the entire war that had turned honorable men into butchers. But that anger would serve no purpose now save fueling his resolve to protect those left in his charge. He was Ser Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. He would not fail these children a second time. They continued south, navigating carefully, with Varys occasionally instructing the rowers to steer into secluded inlets where they might rest or replenish water from a stream. Along the way, they encountered refugees straggling along the shore. Most kept their distance, wary, eyes hollow. Arthur could not blame them. Brigands and deserters might roam the lands freely now. War had torn the realm's fabric, leaving only desperation and fear behind. To keep Elia and the children safer from prying eyes, they often covered the princess's fine clothes with plain cloaks, and she hid the children beneath blankets. When Rhaenys asked why they had to hide, Arthur gently explained that there were bad men who might wish to harm them, so they must stay unseen. It pained him that a little girl of royal blood had to cower in anonymity, but he knew it was necessary. Their journey was slow, fraught with uncertainty. Arthur took some comfort in the knowledge that Jaime Lannister might have prevented the city from exploding in wildfire. At the very least, the monstrous threat of the king's final plan had been thwarted. The realm would remember Aerys as the mad king who perished in his own seat. But how would they remember the Kingsguard? Arthur suspected the songs would turn them into villains or fools. Such was the way of bards and the politics of the winners. He accepted that fate. At last, after nearly a week of cautious travel by sea and short stretches on land, they neared the Stormlands border with the Sea of Dorne. The weather grew hotter, the coastline more rugged. Varys vanished briefly to meet with one of his contacts and returned with news that the war had indeed ended in King's Landing. Robert Baratheon had claimed victory, while Eddard Stark had come south in time to witness the aftermath. Tywin Lannister had bent the knee to Robert, presenting the corpses of those who resisted the new king's rule. The realm was in the process of bowing to Robert, though pockets of loyalists and scattered armies still roamed. More importantly, Varys learned that the Targaryen children were presumed dead. Rumors said Gregor Clegane had slain Prince Aegon, dashed his head against a wall, and that Princess Rhaenys had been murdered as well. Arthur felt an odd rush of relief, twisted by horror. Relief that the realm believed the children had perished, which might give them protection in anonymity, but horror at the thought that many would believe such a heinous deed had truly occurred. The realm would condemn the Lannisters for that brutality. Yet Tywin would remain at Robert's side, forging a new royal line. They believe Elia is dead as well, Varys explained quietly, glancing at the princess with a sympathetic tilt of his head. They found a woman's body, battered beyond recognition, wearing a martel cloak. Rumors claim it was you, princess. Elia shuddered, pressing her hands to her mouth. How can they do such things? Monsters. I pity whichever poor soul it was. The realm is monstrous. Arthur placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. If they believe you are dead, you may travel in greater safety. At least for now. We will go to Dorne, speak with your brother. He will not rest until you and the children are truly safe. Elia nodded shakily, though her voice caught with grief. Doran and Oberyn. I must see them. They'll want vengeance for what was done. what was almost done. Arthur understood. House Martell would not let such an insult and horror go unanswered. Even if they had no strength to overthrow Robert's new kingdom immediately, they would nurse their fury. Arthur wondered if the realm would see more bloodshed. Perhaps in time, but for now, survival was the priority. They pressed on, traveling the last stretch by land. Varys arranged for a pair of small wagons to take them along the coastline, slipping past villages without attracting undue attention. Arthur rode at the front, sword strapped behind him, cloak covering his white armor. Whenever they approached a settlement, Rhaenys and Aegon hid inside the wagon, Elia adopting the guise of a common woman, a hood drawn over her face. The Martell guards likewise concealed their gear, battered as it was. Sometime in the second week after their escape, they reached the Prince's Pass, a narrow route leading into Dorne. The stony hills rose around them, the air growing drier, the sun beating down with unrelenting heat. Yet for Elia it was home soil. She inhaled the desert breeze, tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see Dorne again," she murmured. Arthur offered a faint smile. "We are close now. Soon we'll be in Sunspear, or perhaps we'll find your brother's seat at the Water Gardens if he's there. We can rest and you'll be safe." She nodded, reaching out to take his hand for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered again. They continued, cresting a ridge that offered a vantage point of the desert expanse. In the distance, one could see the glimmer of the sea, the sun shimmering off a shimmering horizon. Arthur felt a momentary surge of hope. Dorne might be a sanctuary for Rhaenys and Aegon, at least until the realm's politics shifted once more. As for him, he did not know what fate awaited him. He had broken from King Aerys, disobeyed or at least circumvented his final commands. He had abandoned the capital. But if any cause was righteous, it was ensuring the survival of innocent children. At a bend in the pass, their small party was halted by a group of Dornish outriders. Spear-armed, clad in light armor of boiled leather, the outriders demanded names and business. Arthur let his cloak fall aside, revealing the white armor that still gleamed, despite the bloodstains he had done his best to clean. Gasps rose from the men as they recognized him, and especially as they glimpsed Elia, who threw back her hood to show her face. The guards looked stunned, then overjoyed, then fearful, as though they could hardly believe their eyes. "Princess Elia? You live?" One of them stammered, falling to his knees. Another looked at the children, his eyes shining with tears. "Prince Aegon? Princess Rhaenys? 7 save us. We heard you were murdered by Lannister dogs in King's Landing." Elia's voice trembled with emotion. We escaped thanks to Ser Arthur and some others. Take us to Doran or Oberyn at once, I beg you." The outriders wasted no time. Their captain signaled a rider to go ahead and inform the main host that the princess was found alive. They escorted the wagons along the pass at a brisk pace, the mood shifting from wary to triumphant. Arthur and Elia exchanged glances, relief flooding through them. Soon, they reached a fortified camp near the edge of the Prince's Pass, where Dornish banners fluttered, the sun and spear of House Martell. Tents sprawled, soldiers marched with discipline. It appeared that Dorne had mustered an army, likely having prepared to defend themselves or avenge the rumored murder of Elia and her children. The moment the wagons arrived, a tall, thin man with olive skin and careful steps emerged from a large tent, his flowing robes marking him as a man of status. Prince Doran Martell. Next to him strode a younger, leaner man of coiled energy, black hair graying at the temples. Oberyn Martell. Both men wore expressions of shock and joy when they saw Elia. She scrambled from the wagon, nearly stumbling, and rushed into their arms. Rhaenys followed, hugging her uncles, tears streaming. Aegon, too young to fully comprehend, clung to his mother and stared at the imposing men with wide eyes. Prince Doran, ever dignified, nonetheless wept openly as he cradled his sister's face. Oberyn's fury and relief tangled as he embraced them all, promising savage vengeance upon House Lannister for what had nearly happened. The scene was heart-wrenching and joyful, a small beacon of hope in the midst of so much tragedy. Arthur dismounted and approached respectfully. Doran turned, his expression filled with gratitude. "Sir Arthur Dayne," he said quietly. "They told us you were in King's Landing with the Mad King. But here you are, bringing my sister and her children home. I cannot thank you enough." Oberyn's dark eyes glinted with fierce admiration. "You are the sword of the morning indeed. You have my respect for saving them. We heard horrifying tales of what Tywin's men did to the royal family. And yet, my niece and nephew live." Arthur bowed. "They do, my prince. Many died in King's Landing that night, but the children were spared. Your sister showed remarkable courage. As for the realm, it is in Robert Baratheon's hands now. King Aerys is dead." Doran's face grew solemn. "Aerys's madness brought us all to this. Now Robert sits the throne. What of Rhaegar's intentions?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "It mattered little. The war was effectively ended. You will remain with us, I hope, Sir Arthur. You have done a service to House Martell that can never be repaid. But we shall try." Arthur hesitated, considering the vows that once bound him to the Kingsguard. Was he still a Kingsguard knight with the king dead and the children in exile? Or was his duty now to these last surviving Targaryens? Perhaps that was the answer. "If you will have me," he said, meeting Doran's eyes, "I will serve the children. I will not go over to Robert's side. My loyalty is to House Targaryen, and these children are its future." Elia looked at him, eyes brimming with gratitude and relief. "We would welcome it," she said softly, "for as long as you wish to remain. My children trust you. I trust you." He inclined his head in humble acceptance. Oberyn let out a breath, glancing at Doran. "Then we have a formidable knight guarding them, and we shall need all the strength we can muster in the days ahead. Robert will not be pleased to learn that the Targaryen heirs live." Prince Doran nodded. "We will hide their presence, keep them safe in Sunspear or the Water Gardens, away from prying eyes. Let Robert think they died in the sack. In time, perhaps fortunes will change. The memory of what Tywin's men did will not soon fade, especially in Dorne. Our banners remain ready, should the day come that we seek justice." Elia closed her eyes, cradling Aegon to her chest. She did not speak of immediate vengeance, only of relief that her children were alive. Arthur could see the exhaustion in her every gesture, the sorrow that weighed upon her. But at least they had arrived somewhere safe. And so, under the burning Dornish sun, surrounded by House Martell soldiers, the Targaryen heirs found refuge. Arthur Dayne quietly swore that he would not fail them again. The ghosts of the Trident and King's Landing might haunt him, but he would channel that guilt into unwavering dedication. Rhaenys and Aegon, rightful heirs to the Iron Throne, were now secrets guarded by the Red Mountains of Dorne. The path ahead was uncertain, strewn with the shards of a shattered dynasty. Yet their hearts still beat, their blood still carried the fire of dragons. That alone was a victory. Time would reveal if it was enough to alter the fate of the realm. But for now, the princess and her children lived, and Arthur Dayne, Sword of the Morning, stood by their side. In a land ravaged by treachery and war, that small flicker of hope burned like the first rays of dawn, promising that, however dark the night, the sun might rise again.